The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Desi VJ. I'm a North-South National Team member and a coordinator for webinars. I'm getting an echo. Okay. Let me go back. Thank you. Today, like our last session, we are bringing you vital information about the well-being of our teens and to help them blossom into productive adults. We are also simulcasting this session on our YouTube channel right now. Welcome in both places, and thanks you joined us. A few years ago, we started an initiative to address the generation gap between immigrant parents and next generation children brought up here. We formed a team with experts in the fields, and we brought you several sessions before on this initiative. We are continuing on this path to bring you this important and interesting discussion, guidance, and support for our growing teams. I'm really glad that you are able to come, and we are able to get Mukali here to help us out. Welcome to yet another exciting session. But before we go any further, I'll just finish up my general housekeeping comments out of the way. We are recording the session as we speak right now, so we will send you a link tomorrow with our follow-up email for those whoever joining through the GoToWebinar. For those who are joining us through YouTube channel, you get the same link will work for the recorded session too. Please also note that we have several of our past sessions have been uploaded into YouTube channel, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel, North-South channel, and then you can watch them at your own leisure. If you have any questions today to ask to the speaker, please type them out in your questions or chat tab. Listeners in YouTube also can put their questions on the chat functionality. We will collect them and ask a speaker on your behalf after the presentation is completed. Please be patient. Don't keep repeating the same question over and over again, and we will try to post the question in similar order we receive them from you. So we will try to cover every one of your questions as we go along. And before you leave, please take a moment to fill in your feedback form and to help us out in our future sessions. And thank you for listening. Let's move on to the main program, fostering growth and well-being, how to balance the boundaries and nurturance in parenting. We have a very enthusiastic and accomplished expert and a coach amongst us today to talk to us and share her knowledge and experience with us. So it gives me a great pleasure to welcome Mira and Kali and Tanikala for this presentation for this seminar. Kali, as we call her, is a licensed marriage and family therapist with extensive experience in mental health. She currently runs private practice, providing therapy and coaching to individuals, couples, and families. Kali specializes in trauma, informed and culturally sensitive approaches, particularly with the high-risk youth. In addition to her clinical work, Kali is also an adjunct professor at the University of San Francisco and a Newhall Fellow at the Graduate Theological Union. And Kali serves as the board of directors for the American Academy of Religion Western Region, contributing to the governance and direction of the organization. Her holistic approach to mental health aims to balance boundaries and nurturance, fostering growth and well-being of diverse communities. I can keep going all in all, but also she is not new to us. She has already been here providing a few webinars on her own and also participated in our Bridging the Gap seminar session. So On all your behalf, let me welcome Kali and Tanikala for this session. Thank you. And Kali, it's yours.
Thank you, DCG. Really appreciative. That was very kind. It's such a pleasure to be back here. I feel like, it's a comfortable space for me now. I have some familiarity with the community here at North South Foundation, and I'm just looking forward to talking about something that impacts all of us, and I feel like really is a big part of the struggle that a lot of parents in our community have. And so I just, I want to add another little piece to what DCG said in terms of me. I'm also an immigrant. So I moved here when I was 15. So I really feel like I grew up part of my life in India and then grew up here as well. And I feel like I really understand the differences between sort of like the Indian sort of way of education and the way that the culture works there, but then I really also understand what happens here. So I feel like that experience also, that personal experience that I have, I think also really helps sort of fill in some of the gaps, especially for our community in terms of some of the parenting practices and why that might be. So I really want to sort of today, what I would love to be able to do is just sort of lay out in psychology what the different kind of parenting styles are, and then talk about some of those, the best parenting approaches for best outcomes, right? So we all want our kids to do well, but what does it mean to do well, right? So we'll just, so that's our talk, and really this is really about, it's called a growth mindset, which is what we want our kids to end up with, because the growth mindset, so we're going to first start off with understanding parenting styles. We'll go into the growth mindset. We'll talk a little bit about trauma and parenting. And at the end of the talk, I will take some questions as well. And feel free to just put your questions in as they come up, and we'll just answer them when we're able to get to them at the end of the talk. So we're going to start off today by really understanding parenting styles. Parenting styles are essentially measured along two dimensions, right? It's responsiveness and demanding, right? So how responsive you are is how much attention you're paying to your kid and how much you're able to be there for them. The perceived amount of how emotionally close that you and your children are, right? That's what responsiveness is. And how comfortable do they feel coming to you? So that's responsiveness, right? And demands are, having expectations for your kids to sort of having expectations for how you're going to, what they have in terms of, this is what my parents expect me to behave like, and all of this sort of stuff, right? So the types of parenting styles, authoritative parenting is the best kind of parenting styles, and it's highly responsive, but there's also high demand, right? So you want your kids to very clearly know what is expected of them, but if they ever get stuck, right, you want them to be able to come to you, right? You want to help them through that bump, right? So that's really what authoritative parenting is. And you encourage independence, you make them, you sort of encourage them to be, you kind of push them, right? You have to push them beyond their level of comfort. And then you also want to maintain limits. So the maintaining limits piece is the other, which is the part that our community does really well. But this encouraging independence and sort of pushing them and supporting them as they're kind of going through the difficult thing that they're going through, right? So being with them as they're doing that is the other really important thing. And this evidence has shown that this provides, a lot of kids have proactive behaviors. They develop more growth type mindset from authoritative parenting. Authoritarian parenting is, there's low responsiveness and high demands, right? So you have a lot of limits and a lot of expectations of your kids, but they're not able to come to you when they're stuck. They're not able to come to you when when there's an obstacle they're not able to go over, and that's a low responsiveness parenting style. So there's strict rules, there's expectations, but there's potential negative outcomes. Kids don't learn how to healthily deal with things, right? So they could use negative coping mechanisms. They can kind of get misled by maybe friends or other resources that they're using to overcome their problems, right? So they could have increased behavioral problems because of that. I hope these two make sense. The third kind of parenting, it's called permissive parenting. It's high responsiveness, so very nurturing parenting, but very low demand. So there's no structure. So it's very indulgent, it's very lenient. And these kids also end up, so by the way, there's a study that came out, and these are the kids that tend to have anxiety. These are the kids that they lack self-discipline, they have authority issues, and they really struggle with anxiety as they grow up. So if you, it's surprising for a lot of people to hear that, because they think as like loving and warm parenting as being a positive thing, but sometimes it's just it just doesn't work. It's just without that high expectations, this can actually be a negative parenting style. And finally, the neglectful parent is somebody that's low responsive, low demand. They're sort of checked out of parenting. There's no involvement, there's no support. And obviously, as a result of this, there's a lot of emotional and developmental issues that occur. So these are the types of parenting styles. So the four type of parenting styles: high responsiveness, high demand, low responsiveness, high demand, high responsiveness, low demand, and low responsiveness, low demand, right? So 4 kinds of parents. So I want to talk a little bit about the evidence and what it shows. So the authoritative parents, so people that had high responsiveness and high demands for their kids, those parents had fewer those kids as they were transitioning from preschool to elementary school. So we always study in psychology times of transition, because those are times of a lot of stress, right? So there's a lot of stress. You're in a new environment. You need to learn the rules of a new system, and you need to learn how to manage yourself in that, right? So that's where a lot of kids struggle. So a lot of kids struggle going into elementary school, or going into middle school, or going to high school, or going into college, right? So those are the times that kids really struggle, right? So that's when you want to study resilience, right? So good parenting styles actually those kids had the least amount of problems with transitioning, right? So those kids had no problem with going from preschool to elementary school, right? And there's also evidence to show that socially responsible behaviors and proactive behaviors are sort of linked with authoritative style, right? So high responsiveness and high support. Also, authoritative and authoritarian sound very close together. So let me just sort of clarify. Somebody said this to me, which is really funny. When I was in grad school and we were studying, tater tots are good. So tative is good and authoritarian is negative, right? So I just want to sort of make the distinction between those two. It's just sort of like it's a memory scheme for how to learn that. So we want authoritative, we don't want authoritarian. So this is what the evidence shows, right? This authoritative parenting can help during times of extra stress. It can help kids become more resilient. It can make them have fewer behavioral problems, right? And it can sort of help them deal with stress a lot more effectively, right? And that's what this is all about, right? That's what all of mental health is about, is how do we under stress not buckle, right? How do we under stress perform well and not break down, right? That's really what we want from our kids, to be able to perform well under pressure, and but not pay the but not have negative consequences after either, right? We want them to do well. So that's why this kind of authoritative parenting is so important. I want to talk a little bit about the growth mindset, its definition and how important it is. So the growth mindset is essentially, there's two things. There's the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. The growth mindset is, believes that abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work, right? And the fixed mindset is the belief that abilities are static and unchangeable. There's a really good example of this. So they did a study on STEM fields and why, girls were underrepresented in STEM like a few years ago. And they found that girls and boys were equally represented. And STEM is, science, technology, engineering, management. I don't think I have to say this to the North South Foundation parent, but so in the STEM fields, they found that boys and girls were equally represented till about middle school, at which point the girl participation dropped off pretty precipitously, right? So when they were trying to understand this, they realized that a lot of girls had actually perfectionism. So what they wanted is so the math started becoming more complex at that age, right? So these girls, what they were trying to do is like they wanted to know what the answer was the moment they looked at the answer, right? They wanted to know, and the math became complex enough that just looking at the problem, you wouldn't know what the solution is. You had to actually work through the problem and take the risk of being wrong. And that was too uncomfortable for some of the girls. So that's why, so those girls had fixed mindsets, right? They weren't able to, they thought that whatever they came in with was what they had, right? They didn't feel like they could develop their abilities through dedication, through hard work, through learning, right? Failure. So learning and failure are the same thing, right? They're both a mistake that you make, but it's the way that you see it, right? So if you see, because we're gonna try, that's really what causes growth, right? When you keep trying and you keep going after the goal that you're setting yourself. But if you have the expectation that the first time I tried, I have to succeed, then every time that you try and don't succeed, you're going to see as a failure. As opposed to somebody that has a growth mindset, every time they try and don't succeed, they're going to think of as a learning experience, right? So who do you think? See, if someone thinks that it's a learning experience, they're going to try, even if they don't succeed, way more than someone who thinks, oh, this is a failure, right? This is saying something important about me. And that kind of fixed mindset, it also creates a lot of shame, right? And we'll talk a little bit about shame a little bit later on, because shame is I am bad, right? Shame is I am bad, and guilt is I did something bad. Shame is sort of like that fixed mindset, like there's nothing that anybody could do to like help me, right? Because I'm already bad, right? And that sort of comes from this perfectionistic, this is a failure, not a learning experience, like all of this sort of is tied together. And by the way, shame is sort of like one of the core pieces of all mental health problems. So somebody that has depression has shame, right? Someone that has anxiety has shame. Eating disorders have shame. Trauma, shame, right? So all of this stuff is all linked to like negative, to this shame-based fixed mindset, all these mental health problems. And shame makes you isolate. It makes you sort of like curl into yourself, right? So there's this social isolation piece that also is very correlated with mental health problems. So I just want to sort of draw the connections between fixed and growth mindset, and literally how those can be, I hope I've sort of made it clear, how those can really be like two paths, and somebody that has and by the way, so that's the kind of crazy thing about this fixed versus growth mindset, right? So what's the importance of growth mindset? It encourages resilience, adaptability, and a love of learning, right? People learn when they're not under stress or when they feel safe. That's when kids can learn. So they've done studies on babies who are securely attached. So they feel safe with their caregiver. And if you put those securely attached babies in a new room with their parent, with their caregiver, that baby starts just naturally just starts to explore, just starts to learn, just is curious, right? Um, but you put like a baby that's not securely attached to their parent in a room, and that baby's not going to leave their caregiver, right? Because it's too overwhelming for them. They don't feel safe enough to start being curious. They don't feel safe enough to start exploring, right? So that is what this attachment piece is, right? So that's what that's how like the safety with the parent, the level of connection you have, the high responsiveness, that kind of parenting, the authoritative kind of parenting, it creates this resilience in kids. It creates this adaptability. It makes them love learning, right? It makes them more curious. And as a result of that, because of this growth mindset that can come from that, there's an impact on development, right? So it promotes perseverance and willingness to embrace challenges, right? And isn't that what we want for all of our kids, right? Research shows that the growth mindset influences brain development and intrinsic motivation, right? So it's like a not external source of motivation, right? So these kids are self-driven. They make positive choices of their own accord, right? That's what intrinsic motivation is, right? So growth mindset has a positive effect on brain development, on intrinsic motivation, and leads to better outcomes. And I hope you guys are starting to see how all these things are really linked, like parenting practices are linked to this growth mindset that creates positive mental health and that creates better outcomes for kids, right? So that I just want to sort of, I hope we're sort of starting to see that thread weave through the conversation that we're having today. So outcomes of a growth mindset. Academic achievement, higher academic performance. These kids are willing to take on more challenging tasks. They achieve more, like higher grades, and are more engaged in learning, right? So at the end of the day, it's not just about the outcome, right? But the skill that the kids are going to take from schooling to their everyday life is this engagement in learning, right? They're going, whether it's a job or parenting or their relationship with their partner or how they're contributing to society, right? We want that kind of engagement, right? We want our kids to show up in an authentic and whole way to whatever they decide to do, right? So that's what the growth mindset allows them to sort of have that engagement. And also this resilience and adaptability, they can have better coping strategies and more resilience in the face of setbacks, right? And this is something that's really important to keep in mind, is better coping strategies, right? Because there's a lot of coping strategies out there that are really negative, right? There's lots of kids, I'm sure all of us know, right? They're taking drugs or drinking alcohol or trying to zone out, like way too involved, like they get distracted by so many things. And a lot of times when kids are sort of like engaging in these kinds of behaviors, parents don't understand. And really, all of those things are really attempts by the child to try to cope better, right, in the face of setbacks. So that what the child is really trying to do is have coping strategies, because they haven't been able to go to parents, they haven't been able to learn how to deal with the stress a little better, right? Because there isn't that kind of responsiveness, that kind of support there. So the kids are just they're finding the coping strategies wherever they are, right? They're finding coping strategies from movies. They're finding coping strategies from the mainstream culture, which obviously is different here in the US than it is in India, right? So these kids are starting to internalize messages about coping strategies that are really negative, right? A lot of times in my practice, I do see kids that are, the parents bring them in and they're like, we don't know what's going on. This kid is totally disengaged. They used to be so engaged in this and that. And, just they've just changed, right? And first of all, I always say to parents, when kids come into me, that the kid has to be willing to come to me, right? So I can't do anything unless the kid is interested in working with me, right? So, but what tends to happen is we talk to the kid wants to come to therapy, and the kid is talking to me, and we start to have a conversation, and they talk about, oh, I used to go to my friend's house, and these are like just friends, right? Like other Indian families, whatever. Went to my friend's house. I took like a hit of the Jewel, right, which are the vapes that are really popular. Or sometimes, oh, we just like, someone was smoking some weed and they offered me some and I just had some, and now the kid has a problem, right? So it's really a coping strategy, right? Because they know if I use this nicotine vape, right, I know I'm going to feel at the other end of it, right? There's a predictability to their experience afterwards. So right now I feel stressed out, I feel uncomfortable, I don't know how to manage this feeling. So I guess I could, hit this vape and it's going to make me feel, at least I know how I'm going to feel, right, at the end of this. So that's something that a lot of kids just pick up. And then these things are like, it's smoking by any other name, right? So a few years ago, vapes were really targeted towards kids, right? They were colorful, and I see that a lot of times with a lot of kids in my practice is parents don't know, right? They're off in college and they're vaping, but it's nicotine, it's cigarettes, and and it's addictive, right? So they really struggle to sort of break the habit. Um, but there's really good resources out there now for quitting as well. But then those are like the coping strategies that kids end up using, unfortunately, a lot of times. If they don't have that kind of close-knit and positive parenting bond with their parent, right? And then they have more resilience in the face of setbacks. So again, and the final piece of this is, students with a growth mindset are more likely to view failures as opportunities to learn and grow, and you'd be more willing to take healthy risk if you saw things as, learning experience as opposed to like a failure, right? So I just want to sort of repeat the earlier point. So how can we nurture a growth mindset? So one of the biggest pieces of it is our own mindsets, right? Like the way that parents view fixed versus growth mindset is how the child is going to view fixed versus growth mindset. So it's in the way you communicate, right? Like it's okay, like this is where you are, but with practicing, and I'm going to be there, we're going to figure this out together, you're going to get better, if you just keep showing up, right? So that's sort of like the important thing. Apologies for that. I have Do Not Disturb on, but somehow the calls keep getting through. I just want to just very quickly, talk about the impact of parental belief on how the child is shaped and their development is shaped, right? So because it's the messaging that they're getting all the time, right? If there's one kid that is being told that you're just better, you're just good at this, right? And the other kid is being told you're not as good at this, right? If there's that kind of comparative thing that happens in a lot of families, then they're getting that fixed mindset kind of message, right? As opposed to, hey, this is where you are, this is where you are. You both can get better if you keep showing up, keep practicing. And that is sort of a more growth mindset kind of way of, and it'll actually improve the sibling relationship as well. So Parents' beliefs and behavior significantly shape child's mindset and development. And the strategies for this are really praising effort, right? Not praising outcome. Okay, so you want to focus on the effort and the process rather than the outcome and rather than the innate ability, right? So, oh wow, you worked really hard on that, and I can see that, I can see how difficult that was for you, and you kept going. That's amazing, right? So that kind of a focus on effort and process. Hopefully that's a different, that shows the stark difference between, oh, you got a 98, great job, right? Which is perfectly fine, right? But kids really do well when they see that their parent is noticing not just the outcomes of what they're doing, but actually noticing them, right? When you say that, oh, you did a really good job, or you got a 98, great job, you look really pretty today, those kinds of things, you're actually missing all the effort that went into that. You're missing the child, right? You're missing, maybe this time was harder than other times. Maybe they were sick and had to try anyway, right? So you want your kid to know that you're noticing their effort. You're noticing their struggle. You understand how hard they're working. Even, by the way, you can do that even if they don't do well, right? I know you really wanted that. I know you gave it your best and it didn't work out, and that's completely okay, but because I'm so proud of you for how hard you tried. And let's figure out what we might be able to do next time, right? If there's something that I can do to help you next time, like, you see how that's a different tone of conversation around failure or learning experiences, right? That's a really important shift that we could make. The second is encouraging perseverance, teaching children how to embrace challenges and persist through difficulties. The big piece of this, I'll be totally honest, is how they see you deal with challenges, right? So after you've had a long day at work and, you've gotten a traffic ticket on the way back, and it's just been like a horrendous day, right? Which so many parents have an experience with that. How do you come home and how do you manage your those challenges? How do you manage those challenges? Kids are watching what you're doing, right? So if you're coming back just exhausted and like snapping at everybody and just sort of, that's going to be what they take away, is like, that's how we deal with hard days, right? So kind of like sort of setting the example and modeling that for kids, perseverance is like, that's a really important piece. And then constructive feedback is destructive feedback is, why do you always do something like this? Why are you always like this? Like, using those kinds of terms like always, or like sort of shaming the child, right? Like, not really focusing on the behavior, but focusing on the child, right? That's destructive feedback, right? Because what are they going to do about that, right? If you criticize who they are, then there's not really much that they can do. But if you sort of specifically focus in on an action that they did, right? I noticed, I know you like, let it cool off, right? Maybe they got a bad grade on a test. Maybe they screwed up on a competition, right? Something like that. Oh, I'm so sorry. Like, just in the moment, just empathy. Oh, I'm so sorry. I know that must feel really bad. It's okay. Let's go get, let's do something fun together. What would you like to do, right? That's a sort of very appropriate thing to say to teenagers, just in the moment. And it just helps them feel a little bit better at the time. But then maybe a couple days later, just like, hey kid, I know, can we just talk a little bit about, maybe some things for next time, right? Can you think about what happened? Can you think about, what you need more support with? How can I help you? And, I noticed a couple things that I noticed, for example, were, the night before the competition, right? You were up really late, right? So maybe next time, we sort of all as a family, we turn in our phones, we sleep a little early so you can get extra rest, right? So just that's a very specific thing that you're pointing out. And, I just want to very quickly highlight the difference between a conversation like that versus a conversation, why do you stay up so late? Of course you're going to be like tired the next morning and then screw it all up, right? So you're kind of pointing out the same behavior, but you see that the difference in the timing of when the conversation was had and the tone that the conversation was had in, those things can make a huge difference, right? Because the second way of talking will definitely make a kid defensive, right? Whereas the first way of talking, there's more possibility for them to be open and sort of actually accept the critique, right? And isn't that the goal, right? When we provide feedback, for it to be constructive, for the kid to actually listen, for them to actually take it, right? For the feedback to actually make a difference to them, right? So those are the two things to really consider, is tone and timing, right? So those are and always having, how I always say this, and maybe this is, and I want to use, I'm not sure how familiar a lot of the North South Foundation parents are with communication, but, I have a mentor. Her name is Ashwini Surpur. She's Yoga Bharati. She has a local foundation that they do amazing work with yoga. But she once told us that, communication is really a balance of two things, right? Communication is a balance of satya and ahimsa, right? Satya is truth, and ahimsa is compassion, empathy, right? It's sort of like a focus on the other, right? So really, communication should look like this, right? It's satya and ahimsa, right? You don't want to get so truthful that you hurt the other person, right? But you don't want to become so compassionate that you don't say the truth, right? You don't want to hurt the other person, so you're not going to say the truth. Like, that's also not proper communication, right? Like, good communication does both things, right? Good communication balances truth and compassion. So that's something that I really want to sort of provide as a good gauge of, like, is the kid becoming defensive? Then, maybe I'm being too truthful. Maybe the truth is too sharp, and I need to sort of temper it with a little bit of ahimsa, a little bit of compassion, a little bit of empathy, right? But maybe I'm being so empathetic that the kid isn't getting the point, right? The kid, and that's also not useful, right? So striking that balance, and I like this because it's not prescriptive, right? You could sort of apply it to different situations differently. So it's a really great tool to use. Your level of truth and compassion might be different with your partner, with your boss, with your child, with your friend, right? There's different ways of communicating with all these people. This can just really help you fine tune what each relationship can take. Okay, so I know we drifted a little bit, but I thought I just want to sort of add in those points to some of the bullet points that are on the slide. And hopefully those are useful strategies, okay? So what does creating a supportive environment look like, right? Balancing high expectations with emotional support, right? So children really thrive in environments where they feel supported and understood. So in order to do that, you want to have really clear expectations, and you want to provide really consistent support and encouragement, right? Support is not just support is not just, here's a tutor for you, right? It's not just about resources, right? Support is really about showing up emotionally for that child in that moment, right? When they're feeling broken down, when they're feeling exhausted, when they're feeling like defeated, right? Just empathy is really the ability to feel that experience in yourself and just say, I know what that feels like, right? I have had experiences where I felt exactly the same, and I'm so sorry you're feeling that way. That's so hard, right? That's what consistent support means, right? It's empathy, it's consistent emotional support, right? And if the child feels like you are trying to understand them on an emotional level, um, that's going to like improve the relationship like leaps and bounds, okay? Then, and modeling the growth mindset behavior. So you demonstrating persistence, adaptability, and a positive attitude towards challenges, right? So again, just sharing personal experiences of overcoming difficulties, learning from mistakes, right? Sharing times when you failed, right? I love telling the story of I was doing bio research and I was like clearly not the thing that I was supposed to do. And my lovely post grad took me aside and said, "Hey, Kali, like this, you don't want to do this. I can tell you don't want to do this, right? So you go find what you love to do." So essentially, she was firing me, but she was doing it in this really loving and wonderful way, right? And I'm eternally grateful for her having that talk with me in that kind of way, right? Because then I was free to go and find something that I love to do, and that was a better fit for me, right? So I just want to the way we have those conversations and the way that we share those personal experiences with our kids, that really can be really powerful and really transformative for our kids, to see their parents be vulnerable like that, to sort of own up to some of their own mistakes, right? And again, increase that kind of connection that a child has with their parent so that they're really able to come to you, right? When they need it. When they really need it, they should know that they're able to come to you, right? And that's really the point of that relationship, of that parental relationship, because our kids keep growing up and they keep becoming more and more capable and keep needing us less, right? Which is what the parenting relationship is, right? So the parental relationship changes from one of need to one, but if you maintain it well, right, then the kids want to stay involved in your life as they grow up. You see, like there's this voluntary, hey mom, like how are you doing, right? I love you. I don't need you, but I love you and I just want to check in with you, right? Like those kinds of conversations become way more tenable because you built that relationship in that way. And now, even though they don't need you, they're in college, they're in grad school, they're off working, right? They're adults, they have their own families, right? Whatever it is, right? But they'll voluntarily choose to have a close relationship with you. Yeah. So again, authoritative parenting supports growth mindset by combining high expectations with emotional support. And it's discipline with love, right? So have firm discipline with empathy and understanding, right? So there are rules, there are consequences which are clear, which are consistent, and which are fair, right? So the consequences have to make sense to the child, but then also having some flexibility, right? And having slight difference maybe, but adapting your rules to that child, right? Being like, okay, this is what we did for your sister, but maybe you are slightly different. Maybe you're a bit more independent, so we're going to have slightly different rules for you, right? But paying that kind of attention to each child, right, is that's the most important thing. Hopefully that makes sense. So the last part of today's talk, I really want to focus on understanding trauma because in my experience, this is sort of like the meat and potatoes of where parents can start to understand you know, where do some of our own ways of parenting, where do some of our own strategies, some of our own ideas of fixed mindset, growth mindset, and all resilience, nurturance, all the stuff, where do these come from, right? So trauma is sort of the missing piece sometimes in these conversations about parenting that I also wanted to bring in. So trauma is really of three kinds. There's acute trauma, which is like, you know, like a big car accident, right? Or getting mugged, right? Those are like a single distressing event. And it causes short-term emotional shock and distress, right? So and you can have issues after that kind of trauma, but they're more like strictly psychologically speaking, they're a little bit more easier to deal with, right? Chronic trauma, it's repeated and prolonged exposure to stressful events. And I want to sort of, domestic violence or abuse are like those are strong examples, but really it can be like more subtle, right? It can be like chronic trauma, sort of like low level, all the time kind of trauma, right? And this is the hardest kind of trauma to treat because it's sort of, it's not like overwhelming, it's not totally like, it doesn't like totally confuse you, but it's just, it builds up over time, and sometimes it's even hard to like recognize it as trauma. And I'll talk a little bit about this in the next slide. And the final thing is complex trauma, which involves multiple traumatic events, often severe and interpersonal. So this is like abuse, neglect, parent that got deported, you know, parent that has addiction, parent that is working all the time, never available, right? And then, you know, the kid gets bullied at school, right? Like these, so they keep having these kinds of multiple traumatic experiences, which could be really difficult for them to manage, right? So, and this complex trauma really significantly impacts emotional regulation, relationships, self-perception. It leads to things like personality disorders, which are really serious, really serious mental health problems. I'm sure you guys have heard of like narcissism and borderline personality, some of those things. And, you know, complex trauma really causes some of that stuff. So, you know, we talked about chronic trauma. I just wanted to show this really quick 2-minute video on the still face experiment, because I feel like this is what chronic trauma is and people don't quite understand it sometimes. So this is a very classical psychological experiment called the still face experiment. That's basically done to show how much attention babies really need from their caregivers in the early parts of their lives. Okay, so this is the still face experiment.
In this still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes when they don't get the normal reaction, They react with negative emotions. They turn away. They feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a good girl.
So, by the way, that's a securely attached baby, right? Because, you know, she needed her mom. So, we all start our lives needing our parent that much, right? In order to regulate ourselves, right? And you saw how quickly, within like 30 seconds to a minute, how quickly that baby became completely emotionally dysregulated, right? So kids that are chronically not co-regulating with their parent in that way, that's what chronic trauma is, right? So they learn on like a very basic level that, you know, when I cry, my parent isn't going to show up for me. I can't trust my parent to care for me and soothe me and, you know, show up for me when I need them, right? So that's something that the baby really learns at that age. So I just want to be um, really mindful of that, right? So this is what chronic trauma is. People think of chronic trauma as like abuse or something like very intense, and it isn't. It's these kinds of like small, subtle, you know, bids for regulation and attention that children make that we miss, right? Because of our own trauma, right? So let's talk about that. So one of the things about trauma, which, you know, it's very well known in especially African American communities, but isn't sort of really talked about in Indian communities, is the intergenerational transmission of trauma. And at this point, there's plenty of epigenetic evidence to show that trauma is literally passed down through the genes, right? So what happened to your great grandmother, what happened to the generations after that, before that, those are so important because those things get passed down in the way that your genes express during stress and all this other stuff, right? So it's a really interesting cultural practice, right? They say I'm from Andhra, right? So I speak Telugu, and traditionally when they used to do arranged marriages, they used to say, oh, ఏడు తరాలు చూస్తాం, which means like they look at 7 generations of the family before they decide how they want to, whether they want to move forward with an arranged marriage, right? All that to say, right, some of these, that there's this intergenerational piece of trauma transmission that happens on a genetic level that actually has a big impact on parenting, that has a big impact on our own lives, right? So, for example, so parents with unresolved trauma, they struggle with their own emotional regulation. They actually have harsh parenting practices, or they could be really inconsistent in their parenting practices, right? So that's what intergenerational trauma can really do. So there was a case study in Rwanda, and caregivers who experienced more significant trauma had more rejecting behaviors towards their children. They had less acceptance, right? Which the children, of course, they kept carrying that on and moved forward, right? So, you know, noticing how, you know, we know what the ideal of parenting is, right? We've just learned about it. Authoritative parenting. You want to being emotionally vulnerable, being open, being supportive, being empathetic for our kids. But then, you know, when it actually comes to it, do you struggle with that, right? And why do you struggle with that, right? So paying attention to your own experiences as you're trying to parent and noticing, hey, you know, like I'm really struggling. When my kid is struggling, I'm really struggling to sort of keep it together and help them. I'm struggling to be solid and as I'm trying to help them through this, that may be an indication of trauma, right? So that's something to keep in mind, is that a lot of is not this, the point of this talk is not to blame parents. I'm a parent, right? And I go through the daily struggles of what it means to, take care of a 2-year-old or 4-year-old. But it's like, it's to have empathy for our kids, just as we have empathy for ourselves, right? It's to notice, hey, this part of parenting is really hard for me, and I wonder what's going on there, and maybe I could work on the skill, right, over time, right? It's to sort of foster that growth mindset in yourself. You see, and your kid will actually learn from that. They'll actually learn from, hey, my dad was really mean when he was stressed out the other day, but then he came back and he apologized and he said he'd try to do better, right? Growth mindset. And that's how you're sort of setting the model. So breaking the cycle of that trauma transmission over the course of generations, you can build positive relationships, have emotional support, be more consistent with the parenting practices that you have. And those are the things to focus on. And emotional regulation, right? So if you're feeling stressed, how do you bring yourself back down to baseline, right? If you're angry, how do you get back to normal? If you're feeling sad, how do you cheer yourself up? So that's self-regulation. What coping mechanisms exist in your family in order to allow for better coping, right? And the positive outcomes of doing these things is better parental self-regulation, reduced stress, better relationship with your child, and this is a protective factor for kids. Having a good, strong, secure relationship with their parent is actually that's an effective strategy for it's a buffet. It buffets you against stress. So kids in Sandy Hook, that school shooting, the elementary school shooting that happened, a decade ago, the kids that had secure attachments with their parents didn't develop PTSD. The kids that had other kinds of relationship with their parents, other kinds of didn't have insecure attachments with their parents, those kids developed PTSD, right? So I want you to think about that, right? The quality of the relationship that you have with your kids is literally going to protect them from mental health issues down the line. That's the sort of importance of it. So there's a couple of case studies that we're going to wrap up with. So for example, I just sort of like, if there's a young child who's struggling with a new task, the parent encourages the child's effort and praises their persistence. The child will develop resilience and be willing to try new things, and he or she will learn that effort leads to improvement and challenges are opportunities for growth, right? So key takeaways are encouragement and praise for effort are the key, and applying these strategies in daily interactions with children is really, really important. The next case study, imagine a middle school child facing academic challenges, right? So setting realistic goals, right? Providing constructive feedback and emphasizing the learning process, right? So those are the important things. And realistic goals are not set based on the kid's friends, right? It's set based on the kid, right? Like where are they right now with this subject, and what is a realistic sort of goal for them, right? So improved academic performance and self-confidence. When they overcome this academic obstacle, they'll have better self-confidence, they'll have better self-esteem, and they'll start to view challenges as part of the learning journey. And so setting realistic goals and providing good feedback, constructive feedback, like we talked about, are really crucial, right? And incorporating these strategies at home is kind of crucial. And the final sort of case study that I wanted to talk about is if there's a teenager that's dealing with peer pressure and self-doubt, it's really important that the parent maintains open communication, right? There's nothing that you cannot talk to me about. All subjects are welcome. And then emphasizes personal growth and validates their feelings, right? So it'll help. I know you know how to make the right choice, right? I remember when I was young, this is what I did, this is what my friends did, and this is how we dealt with it, and this is how I overcame that in my own life, right? So sharing some of those things, right? And I know it's really hard to go through, to be a teenager, to sort of, and by the way, it is true. It is way harder for teenagers these days because they have social media. They're growing up post-pandemic, and those are huge mental health challenges that, you know, we saw a spike in anxiety and negative coping behaviors in eating disorders after the pandemic, right? Because a lot of kids, teenagers that were supposed to develop mentally, they're supposed to go out into the school, they're supposed to figure out who they are, figure out their interests and all this sort of stuff, and they were just kept locked in for like a year, 2 years in some places, right? So because of that, those kids, you know, they did what was sort of oppositional to what their development needed, so their mental health just sort of tanked for a lot of these kids, right? So so these are the things, right? So open communication, emphasizing personal growth, validating feelings, having empathy. Outcome, they'll develop a stronger sense of self and better coping mechanisms, and they'll handle peer pressure with more confidence, a little bit more resilience. So, and the final piece of this, of course, is open communication validation, and you know, supporting teenagers in developing these skills, like having that kind of connection with them where you can talk about uncomfortable things, where you can talk vulnerably about struggles that you had, right? And helping them learn from your own mistakes, right? So those are sort of the big pieces of this, which I hope makes sense. And that's it. So that's what I had for you in terms of the actual presentation today. I know it was a lot of information. I think BCG, I know you said that you were going to have I know you said that you were going to have the slides sent out to them, and you know, and I have a practice. I do some coaching and counseling too. So if anyone's interested, I'm sure BCG could provide them with my contact information with more specificity about any of this. But you know, I'm really looking forward to the questions here today, and you know, I hope we sort of woven through, you know, like the parenting practices, the growth mindset, and how trauma can impact us and how it can get in the way of maybe some of these behaviors we really want to do, right? So I just hope that this provides an impetus and sort of like an explanation for maybe how we're supposed to be trying to do things, and it, sort of identifying where we're struggling and finding the help in those areas, right? Trying to sort of bridge those, you know, build those skills for ourselves, right? So that we can sort of build those for our kids and our families. So basically that's what I have in terms of the presentation for today. Are there any questions, anything that we want to cover in the Q&A portion of today's talk?
Yeah, thank you, Kali. It was really fascinating in all the aspects, and thanks for sharing with us. And all listeners, please, if you have any questions to ask her, you know, it's a good time to ask now. So please let me just write it down in your chat or questions tab, and I will post that question to her as we go along. So please feel free to do it. But to start off, Kali, I have a question of my own. As an immigrant parent and also talking with my fellow, you know, friends and this thing, they always complain that, you know, the new um, uh, professionals, you know, putting too much restrictions on our parenting style. And if I have to think and to choose my word or to choose my relation or demeanor, you know, in a situation, it totally, you know, takes it out of me, all those things. So it's not productive possible. My parents never did anything like that. They hit me, they yelled at me, and then this thing. But I turned out to be okay, and I'm a productive citizen. I'm doing a good in my life. So why is that, emphasized upon? So not generalizing anything, but taking away the situation and the time period and the circumstances and all those things. Is there any truth to it?
I feel like this is, I bet if you went back to any generation, they would say a similar thing about the next generation, right? So your parents probably said that, my parents probably said that about my generation, right? And my generation probably will say that about the next generation, right? This next generation has all these problems, right? And I think one thing to notice is definitely the change in the last 30 years have seen such tremendous change in the world, right? The advent of the internet, the kinds of jobs, right? Like the way that society functions has sort of tremendously changed. So it's so important to notice that it's, the same strategies that worked in 1990s India, in fact, 2000s India probably won't work now in the 2020s, which is so crazy because the world has changed so dramatically. And so we need to update our skills, right? Like if there's this idea of Desha Kala Patra, right? In sort of dharmic ontologies, right? So you want to situate yourself to the country, Desha, you want to situate yourself to the time, right? Which situation are you in? And Patra, right? What is your role, right? That you're in, right? So you always see the way that my dad's boss talked to him in 1980 in Mumbai in the government is going to be different. Nobody's going to tolerate that way of talking to somebody, in America, like maybe in the 90s or 2000s, right? So it's like you have to always sort of situate yourself. And I would say that I feel like sometimes my role is really helping the parents situate themselves, right? Helping them understand how things are different now, how things are different here, what the pressures are that the kids are growing up with here, as opposed to what they were like in India, right? So, and I think a lot of parents are really open to it. In my experience, I've found that when kids are struggling, parents really want to know why, right? And they really want to understand what's going on with the kids, right? And they really care about their kids. A lot of parents in our community like deeply care, right? So once they realize that maybe some of their starting assumptions are have to be updated, really that's what it is, right? Maybe their starting assumptions have to change a little bit. Parents are really open to that, and they're and every family is different. So of course, not the same exact thing is going to work for every family, but that's where a little bit of help can be helpful.
Thank you. And there is a parent who asks, can we have her contact details? So is it okay to give your email to her,
Yes,
to them?
absolutely. So it's, I think, I feel like having access to the information is one half of it, and then getting some help with the application is another part of it, right? Getting help, like how do we apply this for our family? How do I recognize maybe some ways in which I can change, and also set the model, because parents really what they're doing is sort of taking on the leadership role, right? They're the ones that are sort of setting the foundation up for how the whole family functions. So I feel like taking that, parents do take that really seriously in our community, but that emotional support piece sometimes, that empathy piece, because we didn't get it. We didn't get it because our parents didn't get it. Our parents didn't get it because their parents didn't get it, right? So it's like that's that generational piece that happens. And I also want to say that love and parental love is very much a part of our stories, right? Like we like the love of the mother, you know, we have like an idea of what that is culturally, right? But that because of the history of, you know, the intergenerational transmission of trauma, especially with the African American diaspora, it's really about that the transatlantic slave trade, right? But we often forget that we had the same experience, right? That Indians were brought as slaves to the Americas, right? That we were colonized in India, right? For not 200, 300, 400 years, but like 600, 700 years, right? Almost a millennium of colonization in our own country, and what the impact of that must have been on generations and generations and generations of people, and, you know, were their descendants, right? So how stress was, what pain and trauma my great grandmother or my, you know, my great great grandmother experienced, my genes still sort of hold on to that stuff, right? So it's that's something that I think is sort of gaining traction, and people are starting to understand that. But there's also this there isn't enough, there still isn't enough. People continue to look at Indian society and sort of blame it a lot for a lot of the, you know, the social stuff now. But, you know, nobody would dare do that to the African American society, right? And they shouldn't, right? But so we shouldn't do that for Indian society either, right? Because we are also a people that were colonized and sort of have had generations of colonization trauma, right? So all this to say, right, we have to have some grace and have some empathy for ourselves, for the generations that came before us, but also empathy for the kids, right? Because they're in a totally different context, surrounded by totally different people, but, you know, have still the same genes and still the same like parenting practices that were applied for all those years.
Yeah, been successful in some ways and not productive in other ways. I see one of the listeners raising their hand, but we are not able to unmute you. So please write down your question in the question tab, and I can post it for you.
Yeah.
And anybody else also, if you have any questions, please do. You know, this is a good opportunity to get her to talk to you.
You know, and I just want to say the high expectations is an essential part of it. That's the part that our community has gotten down, right? We're great at the high expectations, but if we could add in the high support, we're golden, right? Not having low expectations for your kids is one of the worst things that you could do for them in a mental health wise, right? In a mental health because like according to the mental health research, low expectations are probably one of the, like that's really bad as a parenting practice. So high expectations are great, but adding in high support, that's sort of that's the magic, right? That's what creates like very resilient, highly successful, sustainable kids that are able to sustain that hard work over time, that are able to deal with challenges, that are able to make good decisions for themselves, right? Because we want to make our kids capable and strong. We want to make them like unstoppable, right? Like that's what we want for them. So the way to do that is adding in that high support as well.
Okay. And I'm not seeing any more questions being brought, Kali.
No problem.
So, yeah,
yeah.
you can always contact her or contact us if you have any questions. I can communicate to her, as well as you can email her. I just put it on the chat.
Yeah.
Her email address. And really, I thank you so much, Kali, for your time. Oh, I got a couple more coming. Let's see. Okay, so one is how do I steer kids away from the addiction like screen and video games?
You know, by first of all, one part of it is that the screens have become almost an essential part of their life, because part of the high school experience is the social experience, and the social experience is so online, right? That the kids, if they're not online, if they're not kind of engaging with some of that stuff, they're feeling socially left out. They're feeling socially isolated. So the world has really changed in that way where they do need to be on screens for a little bit. But I would ask two questions. One is, how do you engage with screens, right? After a long day at work, are you sort of like on the phone, right? Like what is the modeling that's happening at home? And the second thing is, what can you replace it with? Because you can't just take away a habit, right? It needs to be, there's that, I want you to think about that as it's serving a purpose for the kid, or they wouldn't be doing that, right? So what purpose is the screen serving for them? And a lot of times the answer is it's emotionally regulating them, right? When they are engaged in the screen, they're feeling better, right? They're able to deal with stress, right? They're able to take their mind away from maybe something bad that happened in school, right? Whatever. So something has to take the place of that screen, right? So that's the important thing to think about when you are thinking about trying to replace screens. So first of all, so these three things, right? Recognizing that screens are sort of, some part of it is kind of essential, but it's important to have some limits, right? Maybe you turn the Wi-Fi off at night. Maybe that's a thing that happens. The second part of it is, again, watching what the household modeling of screens is, right? How do all of you engage with phones, right? So because that's modeling for them. And the third is, can we together as a family, can we go on a hike, right? Can we sort of like schedule like family activities together, which are screen free and that all of you are doing together? So, it's replacing that screen with something else that feels good, right? Are you volunteering? Because that can feel really good, right? Are you feeding, like going to the local temple and feeding people? Are you doing service? What is the value that is sort of taken, that has taken over that is sort of like prioritized in your family, right? So that's kind of the important piece of this.
Thank you. The next one is what to do if the kid had not been interested in learning at all, even if we have high demand and high response and I've been there all along by their side trying to help and encourage, but the kid doesn't care at all and things get worse by teenage. How to
So
help the kid?
I would say that that kid sounds a little burned out, right? Because that's unusual for a child to, even with high responsiveness and all of this sort of stuff. So I would say that probably that kid either has some kind of mental health stuff coming up for them, right? So either they're experiencing anxiety or experiencing depression, something along those lines, but more likely than not, that kid is burned out, right? So maybe there was a point in time when they had too much on their plate and they just got too overwhelmed and just got burned out and fatigued. And now, like they can't get themselves to care, right? Like that that thing you're describing of like, I'm trying to be there for my kid, I'm trying to have high expectations, but my kid is still not responsive. That's very unusual without another confounding thing there. And I would ask them to get help. First of all, that's burnout is a very serious condition, but so can anxiety or depression or any of these mental health challenges. So I would really say that it's important for you to get some help, right? Have your kid, I'm not, so find somebody local. So therapists are only allowed to practice within the state. So you'd have to find somebody where you live. And I practice in California. So, I'm in a totally different state, but get help wherever you are, I would say. That's really important.
Thank you. And I do not have any more post questions. So if you have a final word also, let me know.
Um, you know, Thank you for the questions. I think those were useful not only for the people that actually sent them in, but for maybe other
Yes,
people that
right.
didn't feel comfortable speaking up. So I just appreciate them. Hopefully you guys found the answers useful as well. I think it's so important that, you know, the goal of parenting be that we turn the child into the best version of themselves, right? That
Yeah,
we allow, you know, Sadhguru, who's like a mystic person, but I really like his approach on, I don't agree with everything he says, but certain things are really great, right? Where I love one of the things that he says, which is, you know, you want this life to blossom in the way that it was meant to, right? So that's really what parenting is, right? Is allowing, and I like gardening as a metaphor for parenting because in order for a flower to blossom, you don't have to do anything at the end of the branches, right? You have to make sure the soil is rich, that there's enough water, that there's enough sunshine, right? And if all those conditions are right, and you have to trim the extra branches, you have to sort of do all that stuff, and then the plant just grows, right? You don't have to worry about the fruits and the flowers, right? It'll just happen if all the conditions are right. So I just want to, so that nurturance, right? Making sure that the soil is fertile, making sure there's enough water, making sure there's enough sunlight, and then the limits, right? Making sure that you know, your sort of pruning is, you know, those are the only two things you really need to do. You need to set limits and you need to nurture, and then the plant just grows, right? So I just want to sort of leave that metaphor at the end of my talks, just so all of us can, hopefully that's helpful, and that's just how I like to think about parenting. So thank you all for being here.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. If you really want to ask Kali any questions in confidence, you can always email her at kali.tanakala@gmail.com, or you can email to us at webinars@northsouth.org, and we will, in confidence, send it over to Kali to respond to you anytime. So please, we are all here to help out to the extent possible. Um, thank you, Kali, for sharing your experience, thoughts with us, and being patient with us with all the questions and with the audience. Uh, and I hopefully we will have additional more sessions in the future to, you know, ground this point to everybody else's mind. Thank
Thank you
you,
for,
everybody, for attending. Yeah, and
and thank
thanks for your support.
you,
Yeah,
Daisy. Really
yeah,
appreciate it.
sure, sure. Yeah, we really had a very productive spring and summer webinar sessions. We brought you several diverse topics like college application process, developing soft skills, modern building designs, creating trust and will, and these two teen welfare sessions. So, you know, we had a very nice set of sessions. We are going to take a break for the summer now because next weekend we are having a national finals at Milwaukee, and we are working on all those and making it successful. In fact, we are going to bring in about 20 sessions in that finals weekend, both MTP sessions and general sessions about various topics. So if you are coming to the finals, or if you are nearby living in Milwaukee or Chicago or anybody, please do visit us and come and listen to those talks. And then we will meet again in fall and winter session. We'll come up with new topics to talk, and then please watch for our announcements, register and attend those sessions. And before you leave, please fill in the feedback questions, and so that it can help us. So thank you, everybody. Bye for now. And I really appreciate your listening. So thank you, Kali. Yeah,
Thank you,
you
Daisy,
please.
for putting this all together. Really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hopefully we helped everybody. And then send me those, slides to me. So I will send it to the parents.
Definitely.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Thank you.
everybody.